Most of you may be familiar with the Upanishads, the importance of Upanishads in Vedantic tradition, but still for the benefit of those who may be beginners, I shall give a brief introduction. Vedas constitute the most fundamental spiritual and philosophical canonical works of Vedantic tradition. Vedas are 4 in number: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda. Now, the antiquity of the Vedas is something mind-boggling, according to many great Oriental and Occidental scholars. You'll be surprised to know there is a great turning point right in the middle of 18th century, which continues to our own times. When the European scholars first read some portions of the Vedic literature, it was a great turning point. It was the beginning of a new paradigm in religious thought and Western philosophical tradition. Suddenly they came across something which was so ancient and yet so modern, so scientific, so rational. A philosophical ideal, a religious ideal that gives you freedom to ask questions, that enables you to exercise your reason, your own intuitive power. It doesn't ask you to believe blindly in anything. So that's why you can read a lot about this, how Schopenhauer first happened to read the Latin translations of an ancient Persian translation of the Upanishads, which really took place in 16th century, between 1556 and 1557. When 50 Upanishads were translated into Persian under the direction of a great Muslim Sufi emperor, Dara Shikoh, who was a great emperor of India, who assembled a number of pandits and scholars from different places in India and made arrangement for the translation of 50 of the Upanishads into Persian, which was again translated into Latin by a great French adventurer who happened to join the East India Company, the local army of the British East India Company. This Andekin Duperov, that is his name, who travelled all over India and got some of these Upanishads translated into Latin. And that was again translated into German by Henry in 1801, and Schopenhauer happened to read some of this. But even before that, even in 18th century, from 1755 onwards, many of the European scholars happened to read about the Upanishads. Now, as I said earlier, Upanishads constitute the essence of Vedic literature, which are 4 in number: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharvaveda. And the Upanishads constitute the cream of the Vedic literature. Vedanta. Anta means the essence, the conclusion, the gist, the final word. Vedanam Anta means the essence of the conclusion or the gist of Vedic literature. It's called Vedanta. The Upanishads are the fundamental foundational works of Vedantic tradition. Now, altogether, there are nearly 180 Upanishads, though we know about 220 Upanishads, but many of the original texts are not available. Still, we know that there are at least 180 Upanishads which are now available with translations. Not all of them in English, at least some of them have been translated into English, some of them are not yet translated. Now, altogether, there are 10 fundamental Upanishads: Isha, Kena, Katha, Prasna, Mundaga, Manduke, Taittiriya, Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka. These are the 10 Upanishads. I am just giving you a brief background, then I will come to the dialogues proper. Now, of these 10 Upanishads, all the 9 important Upanishads, except Ishavasya, all the other Upanishads, the 9 Upanishads, are more or less in the form of a dialogue between a teacher and a student. Now, I would tell you something about how this happened during the Vedic period. In those days, householders, when they got old, when they got their hair grey and the face wrinkled, used to go to forest hermitages. So first you study Vedas for 12 years, which is the first stage of human evolution, Brahmacharyasama, the period of novitiate, the period of studentship. You study the Vedas, and you also study how to be a responsible son or a daughter, or how to be a responsible husband or wife, how to grow up as a responsible citizen of the country, a responsible member of the family, a responsible human being. So you are given training for 12 years, which is called the period of novitiate, Brahmacharyasama, the first stage of human evolution. The second stage is householdership. After 12 years of education, you return home, and then you marry, and you become a responsible householder. To give an example how this system used to work in ancient times, I can just quote one convocation address from Taittiriya Upanishad, which comes in the Yajurveda. Vedam anuchya acharya andevasinam anishasti satyam vada dharmam chara satyana pramodidavyam dharmana pramodidavyam. Then matu devo bhava, pitu devo bhava, acharya devo bhava, aditi devo bhava. See, you are listening to a convocation address. Students who have completed their education in the Vedic hermitages are returning home to marry and become either husbands or wives. Remember, during the early Vedic times, women were also given Vedic education. You have to remember a time, at least 6000 BC, women were given Vedic education. There is a statement in one of the Upanishads, in one of the Yajurvedic mantras, that is, Brahmacharyena kanyam yuvanam vrindade phala, means prospective husbands used to choose their bride on the basis of the excellence of Vedic education that these girls must have received. Which shows that during the Vedic times, education was given to women also. So after receiving education, they used to go home, and when they are returning the Vedic school, the hermitage school, the teachers used to give them instruction. Let your mother and father be as respectable to you as God Himself. And your guest, a person who visits your home unexpectedly, without giving previous information, uninvited people, you should feed him, feed her. And also your teacher should be equally respected. So parents, guests and teachers should be treated with great reverence and respect. These are some of the instructions that the Vedic teachers used to give to their students who completed their education and who were able to go home to start their life as responsible family members. And the third stage was Vanaprasthasana. As I said earlier, when you see the face of your granddaughter or grandson, then you should not try to reverse the evolution of human body by going to beauty parlor, whitening the teeth and blackening the hair. and trying to come back, travel backward in time. Instead of that, you should, husband and wife together, go to a place of pilgrimage, contemplation, and spend the rest of the lifetime in contemplation, in meditation, and also in teaching whatever wisdom you have acquired to the new generation. Imparting whatever wisdom you have acquired to the new generation. This is called, this particular stage, third stage of human evolution used to be called the Vanaprasthasana. So there's an interesting statement in one of the law books, Manusmriti. Grihasthasya yadapasya vali paridam atmanaha apatyasya apatyam tada aranyam samasayet. So, how Grihastha, a husband and wife, aged, quite become grandparents, what they should do? Now they should think of higher values. They have done their duties, their duties as responsible citizens or members of the family or society. They are given education to the children and grandchildren. They have acquired enough wealth. Now, the rest of their lifetime, they should spend in contemplation, in meditation, in higher spiritual pursuits. Now, many of these Grihasthas used to be great teachers in Vedic times. And also monks, those who spend a long time in this contemplative life, used to take to mendicancy. They used to become all-renouncing monks. This was the ancient Vedic way of life. Now, many of these dialogues used to take place between these great Vedic sages who have gone through all these different stages of human life and students. And who are the students? If you read the Vedic literature, if you read the Upanishadic literature, if you read the Ramayana and Mahabharata, you find emperors, kings and princes and queens and princesses. Also, semi-educated, semi-illiterate villagers, rich, powerful rulers and soldiers and administrators, and also young boys who wanted to learn more and more about spiritual values. Not only spiritual values, secular teaching was equally emphasized in the ancient Vedic schools. They used to flock to these Vedic hermitages. And these teachers used to teach them not only spiritual sciences, but also secular sciences. I can give an example. Those of you who are interested can later on take this book, Prashna Upanishad, small Upanishad, not very big one. There you find Prashna means question. Upanishad. This Upanishad, this text is nothing but a discussion between a great sage, his name is Pippalada, and 6 students. Some of these students were princes, and some of them were inquisitive students who flocked from all over Indian subcontinent of those times. Remember, in those days, Indian subcontinent included today's Afghanistan, all the way to Burma, from Afghanistan all the way to Burma, and from Sri Lanka all the way to Samarkand. It's a huge land area. Afghanistan was a great cradle of Vedic literature, Vedic culture. So also today's Pakistan. So what I mean to say, in those days, these Vedic hermitages were the centers of learning, and these Vedic teachers used to teach students in the form of dialogue. I am just referring to one Upanishad, as you remember, Prashna Upanishad. Prashna means question. There are 6 students who came from all over this Indian subcontinent of those times, went to this great sage Pippalada and put to him 6 questions. So when they first reached the teacher told them, tapasa saddhaya brahmacharyena samvatsara. The meaning is this. For 1 year, you practice self-discipline, self-control, concentration, and make your mind ready. Because unless your mind is trained, you cannot ask proper questions. And you cannot ask your questions in a proper way. So you should practice self-restraint, self-control, concentration, and purity of life, disciplined life. You live in this hermitage for 1 year. At the end of 1 year, you can ask whatever questions you want to ask, and I shall answer. You know why this special discipline was emphasized? Because unless the student develops concentration and respect for the teacher, and also for what he is taught, that teaching will not be fruitful. That's why if you read Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, at the 18th chapter, there's a verse. Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na sa susave vakyam na yo mam abhyasuyati. Lord Krishna, after teaching the whole Gita, gives one instruction on final, particular parting shot to Arjuna. You know what that is? Never teach what I taught you. Never teach this to a person who has no devotion, no self-control, no self-restraint, and no respect for the teacher. Suppose you are a professor in any university and you work hard to give your lessons properly. And when you come out of the classroom, suddenly you overhear one of the students, that fellow, he doesn't know anything. Then you will hate that day when you decided to take to teaching profession. So, the respect for the teacher and respect for what the subject that is being taught, a reverential attitude, and a sense of value for what we are learning, all this will develop only if students are properly trained to become fit for receiving this wisdom. So the teacher tells, for 1 year, don't ask me anything. You keep quiet, you meditate, you practice self-control and self-discipline, then you can ask questions, not before that. And that's how the Upanishad unfolds. So I'm just giving an example. Again, in the another, right now, as a background, I shall tell you, tomorrow onwards, I am going to take up some special dialogue portions from the Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishad. Therefore, I am not touching those areas right now. I am giving a general overview of the technique of dialogues used in the Upanishadic literature. Then there is another Upanishad, which is called Mundaka Upanishad. An equally interesting scene you will find in these Upanishads. Here, the teacher's name is Ankira, another great sage. And the student is an aged person. Now, this man, he was famous as a great philanthropist. He was a celebrity figure in society at that time. So, he comes to the sage and then he asks the question, is there any knowledge, any learning by knowing which everything becomes known? Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāde sarvamidam vijñādam bhavati. I can just give an example of a very interesting technique used in this Upanishad. Now, a learned person who is well educated knows secular branches of learning, who is a big man in society, a rich man who has got a great reputation as a man of philanthropy and charity. He has acquired everything. name, fame, wealth, everything. Now when you acquire all these, if you are a cultured, refined person, then at one stage, you will ask yourself the question, what's the use of all this bank balance, great name, powerful position, a big job? Are all these going to last for all? Is there something beyond all this wealth, money and status? That's the sign of a cultured, refined person. You need not be a spiritual seeker. Every cultured person who has led a more or less moral life and who has accomplished a lot in secular life, acquired a wealth, status, position, everything. Such a person will naturally ask one question. Is there something beyond all this wealth, money and status? This man was like that. So he went to this sage Ankila. He asked the question, is there something by knowing which all the highest spiritual wisdom, all other things, or the highest spiritual wisdom, the essence of knowledge becomes known? What is the essence of all knowledge? He had learned all other secular branches of learning. Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, all the list of different branches of learning is mentioned here. Whole list is given. Then in answer to this, the great sage tells him there is one spiritual truth which is beyond all this. And that is Sarvavidya Pradishtham. That is the foundation, the essence of all branches of learning. That is knowledge of Atman, the knowledge of our own real life, the knowledge of our own true self, what we are in reality. Are we the physical body, psychophysical mechanism, or is there something beyond this mind, body, intellect and senses and things like that? Am I something other than this physical body? Or am I just a creature that comes into existence sometime in the past, lives maybe for 100 years, and then vanishes one day, ending with a piece of stone in the cemetery? Is death the end of everything? Or is death just a comma or a semicolon? Or is it a full stop? Is there something beyond death? Because death signifies the end of this physical body. If death is the end of everything, we are not very different from animals or trees and mountains, which may last longer in fact. So, this is how these dialogues evolve. And interestingly, even if you extend this inquiry, this discussion to other classical works, you find this technique of dialogues was used in ancient times. You know how Ramayana begins? Kodnyas means Sampadam Loge Gunavan Kasyavedavan Dharmajnasya Kratajnasya Satyavakyo Dharmata. The first and the most ancient Sanskrit classical work is Ramayana. The author is Valmiki, an ancient sage. One day, he was sitting on a river bank. He had become a great sage. He had become a great wise man. He was a robber, but due to association with some great sages, he became a great sage himself. So, one day, another great sage came to visit him, Narada. So this man, Valmiki, puts one question to this Narada, another other sage. Who is the noblest, the most worthy person in this world? Who is truthful, who is endowed with a great character, who is grateful, who is the embodiment of all imaginable human virtues? In response to this, Narada says, Ikshvaku Vamsha Prabhu Ramo Nama Prakirtitaha. Rama is the name of the person who can be called the worthiest, most perfect human being you can think of. And so Valmiki started writing this Ramayana, great classical work. So throughout ancient times, in Vedic period and also later times, you can find this dialogue was a very important tool for discussing and expounding the highest spiritual wisdom. I am going to present before you two more classic examples which are famous. One from a great devotional classic called Bhagavata, the other from another Upanishad called Kathopanishad. So first I shall come to Bhagavata Purana. In those days, as I said earlier, sages, wise men, and wise women also. You find the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find Gargi, Maitreya, great outstanding women philosophers and sages. So they used to visit kings and emperors. Some of these illustrations you find in tomorrow's retreat classes. But I am going to give you another example, which I am not going to discuss tomorrow. This is from Bhagavata Purana, the 11th skandha, 11th book. There is an interesting scene. A great sage was sitting on his throne in the palace. His name is Nili, a famous sage of ancient times. And one day, a group of sages came to visit him. 9 of them. So this particular dialogue is called Nimi Navayogi Samvadaha. Means a discussion, a debate, a dialogue between King Nimi on the one hand and 9 yogis, 9 sages on the other. So 9 sages on the one hand and a king, a great emperor on the other. It's a dialogue that is happening. So Kavir Antariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Abhi Hotrodha Drumilas Chamasa Karabhajana. So 9 sages. This list perhaps you can get from the book, later you can read. Kavi, Kari, Antariksha, Prabuddha, Pipalayana, Avihotra, Drumila, Chamasa, Karabhajana. These are 9 sages. When they came to visit this king, the king didn't want to lose this opportunity. So he put questions to them. In fact, you find when great, even-minded, cultured people discuss spiritual or philosophical topics, it's a great boon to philosophy and culture. Normally, when we meet, we frequently do not discuss philosophy or spiritual sciences. These sciences, these branches of learning flourish. They get a boost when learned men and women come together and discuss. So when they came to visit him, he puts 9 questions to them, of which one very important question is closely related to practical spirituality. The question is this: who is an ideal spiritual person? Who is an ideal devotee? In Sanskrit language, an ideal devotee is called Bhagavadottama, means Bhagavadanam Uttama, means the ideal devotee. When we discuss this dialogue, the questions and answers, we'll understand the true implication. So, the third sage answers this question: who is an ideal devotee? In 3 verses, the sage describes 3 levels of spiritual evolution of mankind. 3 levels of spiritual evolution. First, he gives a graphic picture of an ideal spiritual seeker, an ideal saint, a man or a woman who is leading a spiritual life. Then in the next verse he says, well, there are many who cannot reach this level all of a sudden. It may take some time. What about those who are struggling to practice spirituality, struggling to evolve, struggling to become more and more spiritually enlightened? And what about those who are just beginners? So these are the three stages of spiritual evolution. First, he gives the example of the highest spiritual person. Sarva bhudeshu pasyet bhagavad bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavadottama. This is the first verse in this context. Who is the highest devotee? The highest devotee is one who can see God everywhere and who can see everyone, everything in God. A person who feels the presence of God in everybody, and a person who feels the whole creation as existing in God. That is the state of the highest devotee. Those of you who may think, well, this is a typical Indian attitude, Indian view, you'll find you are totally mistaken. If you want to get a picture of this, you read the famous book, The Way of a Pilgrim, and the pilgrim continues his way. The way of pilgrim, you find that pilgrim is an anonymous figure. You know the story of a great pilgrim who travelled all over Russia and Siberia, 19th century, middle of 19th century. He is a Christian belonging to the Russian Orthodox Church. The typical in Russian Orthodox Church has produced many outstanding mystics. Many. If you read the Philokalia, or you find many, innumerable great mystics. Little fanaticism is the narrow minded. They believe their denomination is the only right denomination. That you have to leave out. That's a problem. Even in this pilgrim, way of pilgrim, you find there is, in India they do all these practices, meditation, all. There is even the great pilgrim who is such a wonderful seeker of God, who silently practices unceasing prayer. Every moment, Lord Jesus, you find, have mercy on me. You find this, he goes on praying on this. But this man says he has some not so complimentary opinions about non-Russian Orthodox denominations of Christianity. Not to speak of non-Christianity. But you have to forget that aspect. If you read it where pilgrim, you find this man says, when you reach the highest level of this unceasing prayer, it comes from one of the epistles of St. Paul to Thessalonians, you find it. So you find even this mystic, spiritual seeker who is always praying to Lord Jesus, he also feels the presence of Jesus everywhere. And the presence of all Christians in Jesus. But the difference is, in the Bhagavata context, the great sage Antariksha says, when you become spiritually enlightened, nobody is alien to you. You feel God existing in everyone, in everything. An ideal devotee, an ideal Vedantist are the same. Highest devotion, highest knowledge are the same. So he says, Antariksha says, the highest devotee is a person who feels the presence of God in everyone. Not only in a person who belongs to his own tradition, but in everyone, in everything. You can feel the presence of God even in a non-believer. So God is present everywhere. Everyone is existing in God. This is the highest level of spiritual growth, where you feel the reality of, you experience the reality of spiritual oneness of creation, spiritual non-duality of creation. but the whole existence is perceived to be existing in God. Then in the next verse, Antarikshasi, the great sage, says, but this is not possible for everyone to begin with. What about those of us? Many of us may be like that. We are all sincere seekers, but we have not reached the goal of the highest spiritual illumination. We don't feel the unity, the oneness of whole existence. We may feel sometimes, but not all the time. So, what about the spiritual seekers who are struggling, trying to reach this goal? So the sage says, Ishare tadadhineshu baliseshu dishatsucha prema maitri kripa ubesha yakarodi samadhyamaha. What about those who are struggling, trying, seeking, striving to reach a higher level of spiritual evolution? We should have devotion to God. We should have association with fellow spiritual seekers. We should have sympathy for towards those who are ignorant of these spiritual ideas, but would like to know. We must try to teach them. We must have sympathy for them. Then there is a fourth group. They are very powerful. If you tell them about God, it's all superstition. If you tell them, well, you announce to them your intention to go for retreat, it's all meaningless nonsense. So Antariksha, the great sage, says, you should keep a long distance from them. Because if you try to teach them, they will teach you, and you will be converted from your path to his path, their path. So we should keep a long distance. So, now this is the method meant for those who are striving, struggling, practicing, trying to evolve higher and higher. They should have devotion to God, and they should be very careful to associate only with spiritually oriented fellow pilgrims. And they should have sympathy towards those who may be ignorant, who would like to know about God. But very important, you should try to keep a long distance from those people whose association may dilute your faith, may distract you, may take you away from your own spiritual strivings. Skepticism and intellectual arrogance, going on asking questions, moving in a cycle, never coming to solution, is an essentially negativistic attitude. We should keep a long distance from it. Now, then there are those who are just beginners. So we already described two levels of spiritual evolution. Those who reach the highest and those who are trying to reach a higher level. Those who are in the process. What about those who are just begun? Those who are still in the kindergarten of spiritual life. Prachayam eva harai pujam cha saddhaye kade na cha tad bhakteshu cha anyeshu yakkaro. This is prakritaka. Prakritasa udakritaka. It's another version. The beginners. Sometimes you come across many such people. And even among them there are some wonderful spiritual seekers also. They believe that God lives in a place. That God will be very happy if you follow certain rituals. If you pray in a particular way. And God will be terribly unhappy, be angry with you if you deviate slightly from a mechanical practice of rituals. They may go to a place of worship at a temple or a church, depending upon the context, and pray to God, and they will hate everyone else. They believe that if you follow certain rituals, read a book, go to a place of worship, pay little money, donate some money to some charities, God will be very happy. You don't have to live your life. You don't have to practice anything. They are the beginners. They belong to the kindergarten of spiritual education. These are the 3 stages in spiritual evolution. You can find it's a wonderful dialogue. The whole discussion takes place in the form of a dialogue. There are discussions about the problems in spiritual life. There are discussions about the way we must meditate, we must practice, we will do japa, all these things. Many of these great ideas, surprisingly you find just I'm giving an example, in the writings of Philokalia and also in the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila, and most strikingly you find the way of Pilgrim. You remove that overemphasis on one's own path, rejection of all others. If you remove that aspect, leave out that aspect, everything is wonderful. Another example of Upanishadic dialogue, I think I shall give 5 minutes, I shall explain, and then we'll have discussion, perhaps 10 minutes. Another graphic example is in the Katha. The whole Upanishad is practically a dialogue between a child and a great teacher. The whole story I have no time to describe at this time. But I'll just give you. There was a great man of charity and philanthropical. He was a temperament in ancient times. He was a rich man. He used to do a lot of Vedic sacrifices. One day he was making a show of a great sacrifice involving distribution of gifts, wealth, cows among the needy people. But he had a son who closely watched as his father was trying to make a show of charity. So he was distributing all old cows which cannot give milk anymore, which cannot eat grass, which cannot even drink water. Upanishad describes. You can just imagine the wonderful generosity of a person who distributes useless things to others and wants to get name published in newspapers. Somebody like that. The son, as he closely watched what his father was doing, and he wanted to bring his father to his sense of righteousness, and asked him, well, you are giving away all this, and your only son, to whom are you going to give me? Now the little boy asked his father 3 times, and the father got annoyed, and the 3rd time when he asked, he said, well, I am going to give you to the Lord of Death. That's how the mythological story unfolds. It's a mythological story. And the boy starts his journey to the Lord of Death. When he reached the Lord of Death was absent in his home. He returned on the 3rd day, and he found little boy waiting for him without food. So he felt sorry. So as a compensation, the Lord of Death asked him, you can ask 3 boons. These 3 boons represent 3 levels of man's spiritual aspiration, the human spiritual aspiration. First he said, well, I left my home without my father's permission. So he'll be angry with me when I return home. So you should see that my father doesn't scold me. Shanta Sankalpa Sumana Yadasya Vedamanyu Gutamumma Abhimurtyu Tat Prasishtamma Abhivade Prasida Yadatrayanam Prathamam Varapadi. The first boon I am asking is this. When I return home, my father should not scold me. He should speak to me very pleasantly, because I left my home without his permission. It's an offense. So Yama, the Lord of Death, agreed readily. The second bone, it represents the second stage of human spiritual aspiration. Not only spiritual aspiration, any human aspiration. Well, you have guaranteed that I will be wealthy, I will have a long life, I have a happy family life here in this world. But what happens after my death? This wealth, my friends, my relatives, the happy family surroundings won't be there after death. So after death also I want to have a comfortable life. For that you should teach me a particular kind of Vedic ritual which will guarantee that I will be able to enjoy in heaven after my death. Sattum agnim swargyam adheshu murtyu prabruhitam saddadhanaya mahyam swargaloka amrutam bhajande edatrayanam dvitiyam varam pranay. This is the second boon I am asking. Please give me the boon by which I will be able to enjoy long life in heaven. But the little boy was so wise, he quickly understood that even heaven is a limited state of enjoyment. After all, what is heaven? Heaven is a place where we enjoy all that we aspire for in this world. So, he thought, that's not enough. I have not understood the real essence of this life of mine. And so then he thought, well, all people die. What's the real meaning of death? If you understand the mystery of death, you'll understand the mystery of life also. Because according to Vedantic tradition, death, as I said earlier, is only a comma or a semicolon. It is not a full stop. So long as we have not reached the highest state of spiritual perfection, this cycle continues. Birth, life, death and rebirth. But Nachiketa did not know much about this. So he asked for the third boon. In a way, indirectly, he was asking for the highest spiritual wisdom. Eyam prede vijikitsa manushi asti tege nayam asti vijayge edad vidya manusishyastoyakam varana mesha varastatyeha. This is the third boon I am asking. Teach me the mystery of life and death. You alone can teach me. When Nachiketa asked for this boon, the teacher was not very happy. He thought he was asking for too much. So, before he began his instruction, he wanted to make sure the little boy deserved to be taught the highest spiritual wisdom. So he tempts him, I shall give you many other things, wonderful things, that you can enjoy in this world. But don't ask for this. But the little boy insisted. And in response, the great teacher, the Lord of Death, teaches him the highest spiritual metaphysics. Atman, consciousness, is present in everything. It is immanent in all of us. It is omnipresent. It is also the highest transcendental reality. Through unselfishness, through devotion, through self-control, through meditation, we can experience the presence of this Atman within all of us. It is present in everything. Once we realize this spiritual truth, then this life itself becomes a pleasant journey. The Upanishad gives a very wonderful imagery of life. Life is compared to a journey in a chariot. We own the chariot, we are traveling. The rider of the chariot is our intellect. The horses are our senses. The rider needs reins to control the horses. Mind is the reins. And this world of senses is the road is the path through which the horses drive the chariot. If we are endowed with spiritual wisdom, then our intellect will be able to control the horses with the reins. But suppose the rider, the driver of the chariot is drunk and the horses are untrained and the road is full of potholes, then you can imagine the journey will be disastrous. It will end in a tragedy. Similarly, when we undertake this journey of life with wisdom and understanding and a discerning mind, then we will be able to control our senses. The senses will not be able to control us. The senses will be instruments in our hands. Because our mind will be endowed with wisdom. So mind will be able to control the senses. The senses will not control the mind. If we undertake this journey without proper spiritual wisdom, then we may end up maybe in the ICU, because the untrained horses will take us to our precipice. That will be the end of the journey. On the other hand, if we are endowed with spiritual wisdom, the journey will take us to the highest spiritual unfoldment. These are some of the examples of dialogues in Upanishad literature. Maybe we will have about 5-6 minutes of interaction. If there are any questions, you can ask and we'll have question and answer sessions.
See, Western philosophy, most of the time, they actually ignore Upanishad because they say it's speculative. It's not a rational thought process. Would you like to comment about that?
Yeah, there is a... Yeah.
Could you repeat the question for the recorder?
Yes. The question is this. Western philosophy traditionally ignore the Upanishadic metaphysics. So there is a historical background behind this. See, in Western, if you read the history of Western philosophy, you will understand there was a great transition in Western thought right from 325 AD onwards. With the Council of Nicaea, Christianity was arbitrarily declared as the religion of Roman Empire. From that time onwards, independent thought was neglected by and large. It was neglected in Western philosophical tradition. And in the 5th century, we had St. Augustine, who arbitrarily imposed the doctrine of sinfulness, the inherited sinfulness. And there was it's called the doctrine of radical sinfulness of man. The total helplessness of human being. Everything depends upon grace, of course. You have to. So, theology practically became the dominant theme in Western philosophical thought. Independent philosophical inquiry that you find the works of Plato and Neoplatonists like Porphyry, Philo, Democritus. All these practically vanished from Western thought. And Western philosophy tried to assert its freedom only with the coming of British empiricists in England and Kant and Hegel and others in German philosophical tradition. But they tried to assert the freedom of thought, which practically had vanished from Western thought right from 5th century onwards. Theology became a tyrant. That's why you always find there is conflict between theology and philosophy, and theology and mysticism. That's why large number of great mystics were given only post-mortem recognition. Many of them were persecuted. So, there was always a conflict between mysticism on the one hand and theology and philosophy on the other. In Vedanta you find mystical experience the highest. The book is not the last word in wisdom, knowledge. You know, one great slogan that Shankaracharya used to shout all his life was Sutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. First, you read the books, the theological canon. Try to understand. And then use your reasons. Yukti means reasoning power. And then Swanubhutya, make it your own experience. In Catholic tradition, any mystic who claimed to have a direct experience was frequently persecuted, was accused of interaction with Satan, or sometimes, it was a very, very unfortunate chapter of Christianity. In fact, now it has come out of that, of course. Many of the great mystics suffered because they claimed that they can communicate with God, Jesus, without the interference of the church or the priest or the book. But the church won't allow that. A church represents theology. So when theology takes over, becomes the dominant power, then there can be no independent thought, there can be no mysticism. In Vedanta, on the other hand, theology is accepted, but you are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to use your reasoning power. Philosophy is also accepted. You can use your reasoning power. But philosophy and theology cannot take you to God. One's own experience is the last criterion. That's what turns religion into spirituality in Vedantic tradition. So, we start with rituals, mythology and theology coming together. Then philosophy. But that's not enough. We should have our own experience. So this insistence on one's own innate experience, aparoksha anubhuti, that is a term Upanishad uses, is a special contribution of Upanishad. That's what impressed people like Schopenhauer, Wiedenitz, Kohlbruch, Roth, Max Muller, Paul Deussen, who translated 60 Upanishads directly from Sanskrit into German. It's supposed to be the best translation so far undertaken by to any European language. So, this insistence, this focus on one's own independent, direct, innate experience, without the mediation of a priest or a church or a book, that was the most glorious aspect of Vedantic heritage. This is a reconciliation between theology, philosophy and mysticism in Vedanta. So what happened, of course, right now modern Western thought has come out of this tyranny of the theology and theologians. But what happened, because they suffered so much under theology. So now they want to completely keep themselves away from religion. Spirituality as different and distinct from theological tradition is not recognized. That's why so much emphasis on the separation of church and state, because they suffer so much from the church, so much of the theology. That's why you read all the great, even Don Bosco, this St. Joseph, St. Teresa of Avila, many. But fortunately you find in the Russian Orthodox Church, this did not happen. It's a great difference between the Eastern and the Roman Catholic traditions. So much of persecution did not take place in Russian Orthodox Church. So there was one-pointedness to the extent of fanaticism, but there was also some element, the recognition of the transcendental, the trans-empirical. Okay, we'll discuss that tomorrow. Thank you.